Hello, good evening, and welcome to this month's Gin Me live tasting for the month of July, but we're doing it in August because that's when the time worked. Super excited this month to be sending out one of our favorite gin brands made by some of our favorite people. You got Portobello Road, celebrated butter gin, or perhaps some of you got the classic London Dry Portobello Road because, as we warned you before we sent it, this gin literally contains butter and is therefore not suitable for people who don't eat animal products, which kind of is one of the more interesting things about it, for sure. Anyway, as usual, with every Gin Me live tasting, we've got Tom online who is going to be making some drinks. Hello, Tom.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, ready for this evening.
Good. And then to join us from Portobello Road is a good friend of ours and of Gin Me, and a legend of the drinks industry, legendary bartender, and now gin maker, Mr. Jake Berger.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing?
Good evening.
Good. How are you, Jake?
Very well, thanks. Very well.
Good. So thanks so much for joining us. Do you want to maybe start by just giving a little bit of introduction to yourself, and then maybe weave that through to the foundational story of Portobello Road Gin too?
Where to begin? I've had many hats over the years, but always in the drinks trade. So started out washing up at the age of 15 and moved to the bar when I was 18, and then managing the bar by the time I was 19. This was up in Leeds, in Yorkshire, and that's where I stayed for many years. Back in 2004, opened a bar up there, Jake's Bar and Grill, which was an instant success, and that inspired us really to spread our wings a little. And myself and my business partner Jed, we opened the Portobello Star on the famous Portobello Road in London's Notting Hill back in 2008, and that's when I moved in above the bar there, which was fun for a while, but the novelty of living above the bar wears thin eventually, and eventually I decided to move out of the flat upstairs, and that's when we kind of started looking for something to do with that space. We'd always been bartenders and bar operators, and until that point really, but that was where the idea for the Ginstitute and ultimately for Portobello Road Gin first came to us. That was back in we were putting the project together back in 2010 when we started doing that.
Yeah.
So we opened what I'm pretty sure was London's smallest distillery at the time, smallest licensed distillery at least, and unofficially was London's second smallest museum. We also did a little museum to gin, the Ginstitute, where we were telling the history of gin and introducing people to the science and the technicalities of making gin. And we decided also to give people the opportunity to blend their own unique recipe gin, which is something we still do today. We've had I think something like 120,000 guests over the years that have come and completed the experience. And we thought, well, if we're going to let people make their own gin, that we should make our own gin as well. So that was when we added the idea for Portobello Road London Dry to the project. There you go. That's
amazing.
30-year career in a nutshell there.
I've got to ask, because people will be interested. What was the smallest museum in London?
The smallest museum in London, I believe it was there, and whether it still exists, I couldn't tell you, is the Faraday experience, which for the princely sum of £5, you can have the pleasure of looking at Michael Faraday's shed and desk. I like to think I was a bit more fun, but I can't pretend I've actually been to the Faraday experience, so I might be unfairly belittling it.
So when it came around to making Portobello Road, what were the sort of considerations for the botanicals or the sort of balance of flavors, what it was going to taste like?
So you're breaking up a little bit there, but I think I know what you're asking me. So when we decided to put Portobello Road, the original version, together, we very much, approached it from the perspective of bartenders and approached it with, an awful lot of respect for the traditions of the category, and not just the traditions, of course, the regulations. London Dry Gin as a category is very strictly regulated, and I certainly applaud those regulations, and we bore those very much front and center in our minds when we were first putting the initial product together. We wanted to create something that was true to that category. So a lot of that was, fairly obvious. There's, the regulations for London Dry Gin state that we have to start with a certain quality of neutral spirit, of course, and that we can only flavour that alcohol by redistilling it with natural ingredients, our botanicals, and after that we can only add more alcohol and more water. So we knew, how we were going to make it, and like most people formulating a gin, that first choice is which botanicals to use. And of course, we, as I said, we approached it from a kind of bartender's perspective. So we chose things like juniper, coriander, angelica, orris, licorice, orange, lemon. Those 7 botanicals are pretty much, I think, like the first 7 you would write down for a classic London Dry Gin. Not unique to Portobello at all. Lots and lots of people use those. But we were also bartenders, and we wanted to create a gin which appealed to modern bartenders that perhaps had maybe a little bit more depth, a little bit more complexity, perhaps a slightly longer finish, a bit more character than some of the other gins that were available at the time. Remember, this was back in 2010, 2011. We were not kind of blessed with the plethora of gins we have today. The 2 additional botanicals we decided to add were cassia bark and nutmeg. Cassia, for the uninitiated, is kind of, I always call it like super cinnamon. It's like cinnamon turned up to 11. Spicier, pepperier, sweeter, and for want of a better word, cinnamonier than cinnamon. And we also use nutmeg, which counts for just a tiny proportion, less than 1% of the weight of all our botanicals. But for me, the nutmeg is perhaps, second in importance only to the juniper in terms of its impact. It gives Portobello that long, warm, down the throat, cockles of the heart kind of finish. And that's why we find bartenders love working with Portobello so much. When we were putting the recipe together, I put together a panel of bartenders and gin industry professionals, and we would kind of sample all the different versions of the recipe. We had a pretty clear idea of what we wanted. It was more, a bit more lemon, a bit more juniper, playing around with the proportions. And every time we came up with different formula, every once in a while we put together this panel and we would try the gins on their own, of course, which to me it's still one of the great joys of my life, talking to consumers and talking about tasting Portobello on its own, because gin is not really a category that we typically expect people to drink straight up at room temperature. But for me, I always get people to try it that way first, and it's refreshing how often people say, "Oh, it's really nice. I could happily drink it like that." But of course, we realize that that's not how most gin is consumed. So we also tried all the samples in a gin and tonic, in a Negroni, and in a martini, looking for a gin that had enough of those classic flavors to stand up in a gin and tonic, enough of those new extra flavors and depth and character to work in a Negroni, where it's coming up against some pretty powerful flavors in the Campari and the vermouth. And we wanted to work in a martini, of course, as well. My favorite cocktail, and the one drink where you can't really hide any of the flaws in a gin. So we're looking for a versatile gin that kind of ticked all those boxes. And I think we did a pretty good job. I think just we at the time we said it was a gin by bartenders for bartenders. I guess it's kind of outgrown that original definition, but we were delighted back in 2018 in the Class Bartender Brand Awards to be named the #1 gin amongst the UK's bartenders. So it was an endorsement of what we'd set out to do.
Yeah, nice. And you've done like a few sort of special releases. Do you still call them Director's Cut? Is that right? Like an annual release of something weird and interesting, or are you not doing that anymore?
So I'm going to put my other headphone in there because I'm really struggling to hear you there, Tris. So I can say that again.
I said you've done a few sort of annual releases, special releases. I think you call them Director's Cut with some.
Yeah, we've done a few different special editions over the years. We really have two dimensions to that: the Director's Cut editions and the Local Heroes edition. So for the Director's Cut editions, that's where we really kind of flex our creative muscles and do some weird and wonderful things. So the first one was the world's first asparagus London Dry Gin. We also did a barbecue kind of one, a smoked one essentially, where we smoked the juniper berries with peat before we distilled them and added some laptang souchong and some chipotle in there, distilled it on the anniversary of the Great Fire of London. I'm always kind of into the idea of cross-pollination between spirit categories, and perhaps the most weird and wonderful one we did was when we borrowed a process from Oaxaca. The mezcal producers down there, when they have a special occasion, will do what they call a pechuga distillation, which is a kind of similar concept to making gin. They take mezcal and they steep botanicals in it and redistill it, which is essentially what we do, but it's just that we're starting with neutral alcohol instead of mezcal. But uniquely, what they also do is they suspend a piece of meat, usually a chicken or turkey breast, or occasionally some ham, in the neck of the still during that final distillation, which does impact flavor and texture and mouthfeel as well. So we threw a party at the distillery, put a mariachi band in the corner, and kind of improvised this recipe and did just 1,000 bottles of it. We'd probably get done for cultural appropriation these days, but it was fun back in 2017.
You're also really at risk of getting targeted by the vegans at this point, I think, because obviously the main gin we're going to talk about here is the celebrated butter gin. And now that everyone knows that you make gin with chicken breasts as well, they're really going to be wondering what the
we're the vegetarian and vegan fraternity. We're probably not their favorite brand. We've done lots of experimental things, really, and I think, for me, a lot of our products, and certainly a lot of limited editions and our more niche products, the idea really is going back to those London dry gin regulations, which I talked about earlier on, which are so important, but they can, like all regulations, can be, handcuffs and can hamper innovation and creativity. And, as I said, most people are making London dry gin are starting with more or less the same spirit, and most people are using more or less the same water, purified water, which is as close as you'll get to colorless, flavorless alcohol, and as close as you'll get to colorless, flavorless, odorless water. So for most people, the only decision is which botanicals to use, which of course does affect flavor. But for a lot of our products, we think about innovation beyond flavor, trying to change how it feels in the mouth, the weight, the viscosity, the finish, how it's perceived in the tongue and on the nose. And certainly the butter gin was one of those. I always kind of say that, with a lot of our products, we step into the future, but with an eye on the past. And I suppose the catalyst for this one really came from our historic research. I'm a bit of a nerd, as you know, for the history, not just of gin, but of all things booze related, really. And one of the great documentarians of London drinking life, of course, was Charles Dickens, who was a man of wealth and privilege, and was not the typical customer for the gin palaces, as they were called, the gin drinking houses, the grand elaborate drinking houses of the 1800s. But of course, Dickens loved to observe that world and document that world, and would also like to draw inspiration for his novels from that world. One of the popular drinks from that era was a gin twist, which is gin, lemon juice, sugar, and hot water. A lot of people think it's the gin twist that put the twist into Oliver Twist, for instance. In one of his books, Sketches by Boz, which is essentially a collection of articles that he written rather than stories, there's a wonderful article where he walks into one of these gin palaces and describes the characters, the sights, the sounds, the smells, and he talks about this vast array of barrels behind the bar. Gin wasn't always sold in bottles. We don't really see bottled gin being legalized until 1861. So these gin palaces in the first half of the 1800s, they would store and dispense the gin from enormous great barrels behind the bar. It would look kind of like the city of York in just on Holborn there, which I think we visited a couple of times before, Tris, with those wonderful barrels behind the bar. And Dickens talks about these barrels having elaborate lettered signs on the front detailing the names and the prices, and they had very catchy names. They were called the Cream of the Valley, the Out and Out, the Real Knock Me Down, the Strip Me Naked, and one of them was called the Celebrated Butter Gin. We did a bit of research for that one and found out that really what it meant at that time in history, butter as a word was used in a similar kind of way to the way we use cream in the modern era. Like when we talk about something being the cream of the crop or the creme de la creme, doesn't mean it involves dairy cream. It just means it's very good. And butter had similar connotations back in that era. We kind of took that idea and cross-pollinated it with the modern bartending fad for fat washing, which for the guys at home there, if you're not familiar with fat washing, it was a process invented to basically imbue flavor and texture into spirits. It started by putting bacon fat into bourbon, but people ended up using peanut butter and all kinds of fats. And you add it to the spirit, freeze it, and then the fat congeals. You can skim that off, but you leave a little bit behind and you leave some flavor behind. So we kind of came up with the idea of using the butter in the gin, the celebrated butter gin. We did basically a distilled fat wash. And at first we just did it as a bit of fun. A still is a fun toy to have, and we like messing around with it. And the first batch came out, and we're looking at the distillery. We have a couple of bars here as well as just the distillery, so we have the opportunity to test products and innovations on the general public before we commit to putting it into a Portobello bottle. And the butter gin went down really well, so in the end we decided to bring it into the family. Everybody here hates me for inventing it, because as you might imagine, it does make a bit of a mess of the stills. So much so, in fact, that we bought a 60 litre still now, which we've used pretty much exclusively to produce this brand. So it's made, all in-house here on Portobello Road at the distillery, 60 litres at a time. We generally do four or five batches a week. If you ever visit the distillery, pardon my language, but there's always on the jobs to do whiteboard, it always says more fucking butter gin. We can just about keep up with demand. And I suppose the way we make it really is we start with our classic London dry gin, which, as a little aside, incidentally, we don't make all our products on site. We have a couple of different production sites, and for the London dry gin, which of course we make a great deal of, the production for that is done by a gentleman named Charles Maxwell at the Thames Distillery, still here in London, over in Clapham. And Charles is the eighth or ninth, I always forget. I think it depends which profile you read. 8th or 9th generation of his family to be involved in gin distillation. And one of his ancestors used to work at the Finsbury Park Distillery, which was the home of a gin company called Brownings. And Brownings were actually, we found later, the original producers of the celebrated butter gin. So there's a lot of kind of DNA lineage in history there as well.
Didn't they used to make? Was it the ginger wine they used to make as well? Or is that
they were. Stone's ginger wine was another one of Charles's ancestors' innovations, and they had the rights for that for a long time. And Grant's cherry brandy as well. Really great historic company. So we start with Charles's fantastic, delicious London dry gin, and put it into our tiny little 6-litre copper pot still. For each each 2 litres of gin, we add about half a block of English butter, unsalted, and then do a slow distillation. And it does 2 things really. I don't know if you guys, probably now would be a good time to pour your sample out if people are tasting along. And if you're lucky enough to have a bottle of Portobello Road London Dry with you as well, it's really interesting to do them side by side. But essentially what it does is, as you might imagine, we end up with a big puddle of melted butter in the bottom of the still. And if you take that butter out and reset it and turn it back into butter, which we don't do for food safety reasons, but we have tried it, and if you taste that, it tastes of gin. So that tells us that it's removing some aroma, some flavor from the gin. And actually on the nose and the palate, in terms of botanical intensity, the celebrated butter gin is certainly a bit lighter, more delicate and elegant than the London Dry, which is a real blunderbuster of flavor. But it also changes the mouthfeel, so it feels creamier, thicker, heavier on the mouth. It clings to the palate. The flavor, though lighter, I find lingers longer. So it's kind of a contradiction: lighter and more elegant in flavor, but deeper and more long living on the palate. So it's kind of a bit confusing.
That comes back to that whole thing you were saying about experimenting with texture and the tactile sensation of it, and not just the kind of botanical ratio. You can have something aromatically lighter but deeper and longer at the same time,
And for me, whenever we're creating a product, we generally speaking do have a cocktail in mind. And for this one, of course, undoubtedly the martini was at the forefront of our thoughts, because the martini texture is everything, I think. And that it's probably I've never actually looked into the proper science of this, but my presumption is there's microscopic amounts of fat dissolved into it, which are what kind of gives it that mouthfeel and gives it that longevity on the palate. And in a martini, I usually just go fairly dry with twist of lemon. I think this is one of my favorite martinis from our range for sure.
It's funny you say that, Jake.
Yeah, he's going to make one. He's going to make one.
Well, as if fuck you.
It's funny you say that. It's almost perfect. Although I'm a little bit concerned, I'm going to descend into darkness, and I have no idea where the light switch is in this room. So
it's almost the end of martini hour. It must be nearly Manhattan hour where you are.
So you have to excuse me. I had to shut the door because there was a house alarm going off, and I've no idea where the light switch is in this room. I'm actually at my parents' house in Nottingham at the moment, and not familiar. So, but saying that, the drink that I was going to make for this, if you want me to go on to it, was obviously a dry martini. Exactly right, and you know, for every reason that you've just explained, really, that I think if you're going to make, you know, if you're going to create a product like that, there's no better drink to showcase it than a martini that allows you to really offer that mouthfeel. It's that texture, isn't it? That viscosity and that oiliness, which is absolutely stunning. So, and also, you know, I say this every month, but one of the biggest things for us is, you know, trying to make sure that the drinks we showcase are really accessible to anyone, you know, from ingredients that can be got from anywhere as well. And so, you know, something like a martini where it's really 2 ingredients and a garnish, it can't get any simpler. So for this one thing I will say is that not copping out slightly, but I have actually pre-batched this in this pouch. And the reason I pre-batched it, if I'm being completely honest with you, is that my parents don't own a cocktail mixing glass or any fancy cocktail equipment, a bar spoon or anything. What they do have though is very beautiful glassware. So I'm thankful for that.
That's a nice glass.
So I've basically mixed it down in like a wine cooler with a handle of a wooden spoon. But what it does showcase is how easy it is. Exactly how easy it is to make cocktails at home. So for anyone that's unfamiliar, just to go through the ratio that I've gone with this is 10-1 gin to vermouth. Super, super, super dry. You know, it's all about personal preference. And if you wanted something that has, I guess, I don't know, maybe a little bit more spice or more botanicals from the vermouth, you could go with a slightly higher ratio. I've gone with martini extra dry. Again, it could be Nully Prior, but this is the most common or one of the most common vermouths that's available in any supermarket anywhere in the country.
And it's what was in your parents' cabinet.
And it is. Yeah, no, well, believe it or not, they drink brandy and that's about it. So, there's probably some in there somewhere. So I've pre-batched it. I've gone 10 parts of the celebrated butter gin to 1 part dry vermouth. I've stirred it down and I've repackaged it in this Whiskey Me pouch, which again is great because if you think about it, you know, you could take this traveling with you. You want to make cocktails or reuse the pouches as well. It's a fantastic way of doing so.
I use them for mouthwash when I go on holiday.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Exactly.
Better than taking a massive bottle with you.
That's it. I think Tristan's recently used them.
It has a little bit juniper about it as well.
Yeah, aftershave. That's it. I think you've used them recently for energy drinks, haven't you, Tristan? Or similar?
Yeah, man. I make my own energy gels for ultra running, and I tell you, what, energy gels are so expensive, and the ingredients are so cheap. So I just make big batches, and I get a syringe, pump them into the pouches, keep them in the fridge, and just grab one before I go out. It's perfect.
That's the way. So yeah, very simply for this one, I've got my chilled glass or chilled-ish glass. I'm going to discard the ice, and I'm simply going to pour what will be probably, to be fair, well, it's going to be at least 100 millilitres of celebrated butter gin or Portobello butter gin martini into this chilled glass.
Did you add any water? Did you add any water to it, Tom?
I stirred it down. So I stirred it for the dilution over ice, and then redecanted it back into the pouch. As I say, only really because I felt it might not be the greatest brand representation for Jane to be sat there with my mum's Stella pint glass and wooden spoon.
I'm all for improvised cocktails. It's fine.
I know, I'm sure you would have probably enjoyed it, to be honest. And again, just a simple lemon twist over the top. I've just zested or taken the zest of a lemon. Just going to zest it over the top. I know Tristan is not a fan at all of having garnishes in martinis, but I do sometimes like it. So I'm going to drop that in there like so. And that's it. Very simple. 10 parts of the celebrated butter Portobello Road gin, 1 part vermouth, and stirred down over ice with a twist of lemon.
Nice. I was just thinking, you could, if you didn't have ice, you could just pour the kind of ingredients along with a bit of water into the pouch and stick it in the freezer for a little bit, couldn't you?
In the freezer, yeah. Well, I actually had it on, had it sat on a in ice on an ice cooler just next to me, like an ice bucket next to me. Just chilling.
If you're going to pre-dilute, I think about 15-20% of the overall total liquid added in water, and then stick it in the freezer,
exactly,
and you're generally pretty good.
Yeah, it's great though, isn't it? Because if you think, I think a lot of the, and again, really trying to strip it back to people drinking at home. They have guests round and all these types of occasions. Broken down, they are quite simple drinks to make in batch and on bulk, and quite accessible. If you've got 10 or 12 guests coming round, like you said, you get the dilution right, keep it in the freezer or very cold at least, or on ice, and you can just go around the table like you would with a bottle of wine.
I think Ernest Hemingway once said that you should never mix more than one martini at a time, but I suspect he was usually just mixing for himself, not for a batch of 12. So I've got no problem with batching.
His quantities were probably slightly greater than the average human being. So he's probably mixing the equivalent of what would be for about 6 people nowadays.
Sure enough.
So yeah.
A litre.
Fantastic gin, love it. I love the mouthfeel. I love everything about it, and it works so well in that drink.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, I'm drinking it because I had the ingredient to hand with like a martini, but instead of using vermouth, I'm using a bit of dry Oloroso sherry, because I was thinking about the butter, and then I was thinking about that biscuitiness that you get in some sherries, Madeiras, and other fortified wines that have been oxidized. I was thinking, is there a thing there with the biscuit and the butter? Anyway, it works really nicely.
So what have you got, a Manzanilla or Fino or something?
No, it's an Oloroso, so it's aged.
Oloroso.
Yeah. So it's got some of that nuttiness coming through, and it works really, really well. Yeah. The other drink though, Jake, that sprung to mind, you must have done this, is the breakfast martini, of course, because it's breakfast and butter, right?
One of the most popular drinks we use it in here as well is our Paddington Bears marmalade sandwich, which is basically very similar to a breakfast martini. It's a marmalade sour with a tiny dash of Aperol in it as well, and we dust that with toast dust as well, so to give it that little kind of toasted break finish. And of course, being here on Portobello Road, which is synonymous with Paddington Bear, that one flies out.
Yeah, I bet it does. Yeah, that sounds good. Cool. Well, that's excellent. I don't think we covered it all very succinctly, which is impressive because. I
know Jake's only got a couple more minutes. I have one more drink to make.
Oh, have you?
Go on,
if you don't mind. I thought I'd spoil you all. If that's all right. I know you've only got a few more minutes.
Yeah, go for it.
But I thought it would only be fair to be equal to everybody, depending on what gin they got. And again, another very simple drink, and one that we've not actually made. I don't think on any of these tastings. I don't believe so, at least so far. Obviously, the gin and tonic, which is so synonymous and so simple and so classic. And I would suspect, although I might not know this, but Jake might, as being the largest volume gin drink in the world, I presume.
Right? It's certainly in the modern gin kind of revolution of the last 15 years. If you look at the sales figures, it all really sprang from countries where the gin and tonic had boomed in popularity. I think those stupid big glasses that came from Spain at one point, something like 95% of all the gin sold in Spain was going to gin and tonics. And in this country, I think it's around about 3/4. America's the other one out. America, still more of it goes into martinis and gin and tonics. But
which
for the
is
rest
crazy,
of the world,
isn't it? You think
rest
about
of the
how
world,
many
the G&T is really driving all that growth. Yeah, it's weird. I think it's because perhaps it's because historically speaking, perhaps American tonic wasn't perhaps as nice as ours, and certainly it took a while for companies like Fever-Tree to get a foothold there. But I think it's changing over there. Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Go for it, Tom.
I mean, the one thing I will say about it is that I honestly believe, on balance, controversially, maybe of all the drinks created, mixed drinks created, I actually think it's the greatest ever created in a certain respect, because it is almost for every occasion. It's a restorative drink. It's refreshing. It's light. It's delicate. It's perfect on a plane. It's great in summer. But it just fits so many different occasions that I find it perfect. So for this one, on the tasting card that we've got, we were sort of suggesting a gin and tonic with a sprig of rosemary, which I think works really nicely. And having that sort of botanical element to it, or that sort of herbal element to it, I think works really well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go with around about, I don't know, I like aeroplane measures. So I'm going to go with about 60 to 70 millilitres of the Portobello Road London Dry. I've chosen something that's in every supermarket, but the Fever Tree Mediterranean tonic, just because I like the flavours that go along with it. I think it adds
my favourite too.
Yeah, so you've got, when you've got a really classic London Dry, try and get the twist of the bottle right. You've got a really classic London Dry. I think to add slight, different nuances through the tonic can really play well in a drink like this. So I'm going to go with what's probably, it's 2-to-1 tonic to the gin.
2-to-1. That's a punchy gin and tonic, mate. That's basically a wet martini that you're making there.
I'm going to the pub after this.
I'm not after that now.
And then I'm going to garnish it with 2 garnishes. One, I always think it's nice to get some lemon oils over the top of a drink like this. I just love the aromatics of lemon anyway. So I'm just going to twist this lemon peel over the top. And I think lemon and rosemary work really well together. So I'm just going to give this a bit of a bash, this rosemary sprig. And I'm going to garnish that just on the inside of the glass like so. And have a classic, well, not necessarily a classic, but a London Dry Portobello Road gin and tonic with a Mediterranean tonic and a sprig of rosemary.
I've got drink envy. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers. You too. I think I'm going to have to go make one in a minute. Brilliant. Well, thanks, lads. That was great. Really good.
Well, thank you for having me on, gentlemen. And thank you to everybody watching at home. I hope you enjoy your celebrated butter gin or your London Dry gin. We are situated right here on Portobello Road. We're open every day. If you're in the neighbourhood, pass by. We're happy to give you distillery tours or tasting flights. And of course, you can book online to join us for our full Ginstitute session. So we'd love to see somebody down here.
Perfect. All right.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.